Hi.
Aviva.
No, it's not. No, it's not a picture.
Which one is
Hello,
that?
Kahn.
We'll just give it another minute
Hi.
to join, and then we'll start. Yeah, in just a second. Okay. Well, I guess we can get started. It's 7 now. So I just want to say good evening and thank you all so much for attending this very exciting launch of Exiled Writers Inc. Poetry Chapbooks. If I could just make sure or ask everyone if they can make sure that they're muted right now until you're participating. So if everyone can just mute themselves. Okay, thank you. My name is Danielle Maisano and I will be your host this evening. The chapbooks being launched tonight feature the culmination of work completed through Exiled Writers Inc. Mentoring and Translation Scheme, which began in 2019. The scheme focuses on both poetry and prose for those of a refugee and exiled background, a community currently underrepresented in the UK literary world. 12 emerging writers were selected for the scheme on the basis of the quality of their work. They participated in one-to-one sessions with established mentor writers and translators from November 2019 to July 2020. These authors are from Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Zimbabwe, Cyprus, Poland, Argentina, and Costa Rica via Nicaragua, all of them now living in England. Our team of mentors and translators have provided these authors with support and advice, helping them to develop their work further in order to gain greater access to the UK literature world. The program is kindly funded by the Arts Council England, Garfield Weston Foundation, and the Nina and Roger Stewart Charitable Trust. The project ends with a wonderful event on Saturday, the 13th of February for writers of refugee and migrant backgrounds with a focus on accessing opportunities in publishing and a chance to ask experts their questions. Exiled Writers Inc. will continue to help our brilliant authors with opportunities to take part in literature festivals, readings, and publishing opportunities. The Mentoring and Translation Program is just one example of the work that we do here at Exiled Writers Inc. In 2020, we celebrated 20 years as an organization that focuses on providing a space for writers to be heard and to promote the creative literary expressions of refugees, migrants, and exiles, encouraging cross-cultural dialogue and advocating for human rights through literature and literary activism. You can find out more about our activities and how to become a member by visiting our website, and I'll put the link in the chat. A little information on how the evening will unfold. I will be introducing each mentor, who will then introduce the poet with whom they have worked over the past year. The poet will then read a few poems from their collection. To purchase the books, please email exiledwritersinc@gmail.com, and I'll also put that info in the chat. They're £5 each or 3 for £12, and they should also be available on our website shortly. So now, without further ado, our first mentor of this evening is Catherine Davidson. Catherine is a novelist, poet, and essayist who grew up in California and now lives in the UK. Her first novel, The Priest Fainted, was chosen as a notable book of the year by both the New York Times and LA Times. In 2018, she published The Orchard, a short novel about family, genocide, and apricot jam. She teaches creative writing at Regent's University, London. Thank you and welcome, Catherine.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Danielle. I think I didn't know I was muted. Welcome to everyone here. It's wonderful to be here with you this evening for this event. I was first introduced to Mehrangiz Rassapour's poetry when I was brought on as an editor for this pamphlet project. As I read some of her earlier translated works, it was clear to me that I was encountering a voice like nothing I had read before. I was compelled and curious. Later, I discovered why this voice seemed so powerful to me. Peggy had come to EWI having already published 4 books in Iran, where she's considered a master of classical Farsi poetry, after a career as a revered editor and literary critic, multiply translated around the world. She began writing at age 9, published her first ghazal at 13. Peggy was awarded the title Dawn of Literature by French newspaper Le Temps for her works in French, and we feel really honored to be presenting her first collection in English. To create English versions of these poems required close collaboration between poet and editor. Working mostly with Peggy's own translations, we debated, discussed, deliberated together over the final versions. The result is something that feels to me like it's coming from another language and yet sings in English, expressing a voice that's both spiritual and sensual, imperious and tender, cosmic and earthy, with often dramatic lineation and imagery. Each adventure into one of the poems was like a trip to a different planet, the planet of the immortals, as her pamphlet is titled. Thank you very much. Peggy.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my turn?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. And I want to thank all those who have been working very hard to bring this gathering together and this booklet to be published. A special thanks goes to dear Catherine Davidson. That's working with her. It was one of the best experiences in my literary and cultural career, and I hope will continue. Tonight, due to lack of time, I am reading a few short poems from the booklet, The Planet of the Immortals. That is the name of one of the long poems in this booklet. And I start with a poem called Woman's Miracle. Woman's Miracle. Desert and the incendiary sun. But woman's tongue is moist. She licks the thorns tree. Blossom sprout on the peak of his clothes. She licks the soil's tree. A fountain emerges. She licks the stone's dream. It bears fruit. She licks the dream of the driest leaf taken by the wind. It jumps back on the bough. And woman, she dances in heaven. Second poem calls Every Dawn. Every dawn, I drank the essence of light. Every dawn, I laugh at the lifespan of stars. Every dawn, the cord of your truth became a column of light. I climbed up it, stood, and understood. Every dawn, you sat on the horizon like the angel of revelation. Don't say no, I saw you. Every dawn, I became the reason for the night's suicide. This poem called You Don't Know Me, Bird. Bird, go, go, go before I say something. The sky is my place, my space. The sky is my space. Someone there has scattered stars for me. What have you got? Seed. Where? On earth. You see, bird, you don't know me. Thank you. Do I have still time? Do I have still time?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Okay. I go for a very short poem. Be like water, even if you avoid passing through flowers and grass. Flowers and grass grow from wherever you pass. And another one is the stagnant water is docile, molded to the bowl's shape. But the flowing water takes the bowl with it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next mentor is Jane Duran. Jane was born in Cuba and brought up in the United States and Chile. She has published 5 collections of poetry, including Coastal, Graceline, and American Sampler. Together with Gloria Garcia Lorca, she has translated 3 collections of Lorca's poetry. A bilingual edition of her book, Silences from the Spanish Civil War, was published in Spain in 2019. Welcome, Jane. I think you're still muted, Jane. So.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's been really fascinating taking part in this mentoring program. The poet I've worked with is Lester Gomez Medina. Lester was born in Nicaragua and left with his family when he was 14 and moved to Costa Rica, where he went to university. He studied Spanish philology at the University of Costa Rica, and he moved to England in 2014. And it's here that he really became serious about his writing. It's been a real pleasure working with Lester. He has a very fine poetic talent, very fine poetic sensibility, and we communicated well. I'm a Spanish speaker, so we were able to work together by moving between the 2 languages, and that was a really important part of the whole creative process. I did encourage Lester to write in his mother tongue because I felt he could express more complex. Well, it's his strong language, and he could express complex thoughts and feelings in his mother tongue. But we could discuss then both the translations and the Spanish poems. So that was very enriching. Most of the poems in his booklet are about his life in Nicaragua and Costa Rica, but they're also about leaving. They're about leaving his roots, coming to England, and they're about never leaving his roots, even though he's abroad. That sort of duality is in the poems. What I admire about his poems is they're very honest, although they're about some quite difficult subjects. I think they're courageous, but also when he's writing about other people, and he's very somehow has a generosity of spirit, and he's very there's a tenderness in the poems, and I think these qualities are all in each of the poems of his booklet: that honesty, courage, tenderness, and generosity. Lester was first a story writer. He came to poetry from story writing. So his poems, his booklet is called The Riddle of the Cashew, and all the poems in The Riddle of the Cashew have a strong narrative thread, but he is also able to be lyrical and express very powerful feelings through metaphor. So that's nowhere more evident than in the first poem he's going to read, which is called Menzalji, Under the Rain of 1979. And this was a very tragic story about his aunt, who at the age of 14, she was about to turn 15, was killed during the Nicaraguan Revolution. So I'll pass you now to Lester and to hear his poems.
Thank you, Jane. Good evening, everyone that has attended to this session. I know that there are some friends of at least one scene as from Costa Rica and one from Switzerland and some in England. So thank you. First of all, let me share with you what inspired this poem. 1979 was a year of war, of revolution in Nicaragua. I remember there was a grave in the house I grew up, and the cross was painted pink. Some of my cousins and I used to play in that part of the house, ignoring why the grave was there. So I think I'm trying to express that story in these poems titled, the book is here, by the way. Mercedita, under the reign of 1979. The youngest of my aunts was going to be 15. She asked for a dress and pink shoes. She wanted a day without rain for her birthday party. If Sandino had known, he would have stopped the rain for her, if only for that day, as a gift to Mercedita. Pity that the general was no longer in charge. One night, Mercedita felt the cold. First, it came through her legs. She said she couldn't feel them. The rain clouded her vision. Mercedita heard the sky thunder. She heard a plane passing by. The rain reverberated over the houses like bombs from airplanes, like rifles, bullets bouncing off the roof, like water scurrying in houses. And people got wet, Mercedita, like you. I'm gonna read the second poem. Once again, what inspired this poem, once I found out about this kind of definition for poetry, and it said, poetry is what we have forgotten. I have kept this phrase, this idea since then. So at the beginning of the lockdown, I received a WhatsApp text that said, hola. And I didn't know who this hola came from. So then I found out that it was one of my cousins that I haven't seen in 26 years. So the next poem is inspired in that, and it's called The Girl and the Woman. It was daybreak when we left, quietly, so as not to awake anyone. I took a large suitcase and my backpack. We left with whatever we could carry. Once out in the street, we didn't look back. It was dark. The girl slept in the side room. I didn't go up to wake her, touch her shoulder or tell her I was leaving. I didn't hug her, kiss her on the cheek or tell her I wasn't returning. I didn't hear her voice. I was told to keep quiet. I bent down to tie my shoelaces. Everything stayed back that morning. The neighbors' dogs that didn't bark, the freshness of night in the patio, the smell of the iron gate on my hand. The yellow glow of the lamp's post lightened to the road to the station. I slept, distrusting the hours before dawn. You left and left me behind. The woman she now is, Tommy. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the poems.
Thank you so much, Lester. Thank you, Jane. Our next mentor is Aviva Dautch. She is a poet, educator, and curator. She has a PhD in poetry, and her poems, literary essays, and reviews appear in magazines including Agenda, Modern Poetry and Translation, The North, and Poetry Review, and are anthologized in 9 Archer's Press's Primers 3. She received an award from the Society of Authors to write her first collection, We Sigh for Houses, which was the subject of a BBC Radio 4 poetry program in 2020 and will be published next year. Welcome, Aviva.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's really a pleasure to be here and to work with several amazing exiled writers. I actually had the privilege of working with 3 from Lebanon, Afghanistan and Poland respectively. So I'm going to introduce them one by one, tell you a little bit about them and have them read their work. But I just want to start off by saying a quick thank you myself, because I noticed my own mentor was on the Zoom, which is a real delight, and that's Mimi Carvati. So I wanted to say thank you to her, not just for teaching me to write poetry, but for teaching me to listen to poetry. What she always did for me as a mentor was never impose her voice, but listen and find out what it was I wanted to say. And I think that's what all of us as mentors have been trying to do this year, which is help each of these poets be more themselves. And for me, that's been a particularly interesting job working with 3 different poets who are all so incredibly different from each other, as you'll hear. So the first poet I'm going to introduce you to is Janan Saab. Janan Saab grew up in the Levant, and her collection is called Verses from the Levant. But she moved to the UK several decades ago, and she's been writing for 30 years. She amazingly managed to combine being a single mum, having a full-time day job, and doing evening classes in writing, which I think would be quite a challenge for anybody. She's been part of the troubadour scene, working for many years with Anne-Marie Fife. She's published a previous online collection and had poems in magazines, most recently London Grip. Jan is also an artist, and one of the fun things about her pamphlet is that she also illustrated it herself, so multi-talented. In terms of Jan as a poet, she's a very delicate poet. It is, as she said, it's verses from the place of her childhood, and that place, that sense of place, the landscape, becomes a character in itself. And the poems also chart the interior landscape of her emotions and memories. She has poems about faith and spirituality, about her childhood and family, especially her father. And I think probably the most tender poems in her collection are her poems about him. They're poems about grief, but they're also about the joy of that early childhood. So Janan. Oh, now we've had a few technical issues with Janan, and actually Irene was going to be her voice. We do have Jan on screen, but Irene hopefully is here. There we go. So Irene, if you could unmute, and then Janan's going to do it by video call from Irene's account. So Irene, will you unmute?
Can you hear me? Oh, yes. I have 3 poems to read for you. The first one is called Garden Fence. I happen to be in front of my former house, where we lived after I got married at 18. Could not help gazing through the garden fence. There, both kids were born and partially raised. Years of vast family memories, children's parties, garden parties were left behind, but not forgotten. Go away, you hear me? You do not belong here. Go back to the west, where you have been living. They thought I had forgotten the trees and the gardens, the kids' playground, which my father founded. The fragrance from jasmine and gardenia trees flowing into the hearts of passers-by year after year. I do not forget. My spirit is free to pull away, to dash back to gardens nurtured by the sun and fresh air, vocal like birds, bouncing on trees with an invisible, all-rich soul yearning to adjoin. Memories sketched upon the leaves of the trees, wide-ranging verses to summon up endlessly.
I think someone's recommended.
I think Jan should. I think Jan should mute her.
I have.
So, because what we're hearing, this is coming through.
It might be, Irene, it might be your laptop. If your laptop is mute, can you mute your laptop?
Which one do I mute?
If you're looking up to your laptop, if you mute your laptop.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So if you turn the sound off your laptop.
I've only got my phone on.
Okay, but there's no sound coming out of the laptop though?
I have to have, I think Jan should mute her. Jan, have you muted your?
I did not touch the phone.
No, I know you didn't. I know, I asked you not to, that's fine. So,
Right, your
Aviva, could you, no, Danielle, you're in charge. Is Jan's Zoom muted?
Let me see.
Yeah.
Right. Can I read my second?
No, what we need is Jan's Zoom to be muted.
Yeah, she is.
She's muted.
I think.
Have you muted Jan's Zoom?
Yeah, she's muted. Yes, she's muted.
Danielle, what was our backup plan for this?
So Aviva was going to.
I think we might need to do that.
Second term.
Just wait. Let's get the sound right, Jan. Just wait a moment, please. If we can,
you tell me.
Aviva, what do you suggest?
The phone that Jan is on, but your other phone. You need a microphone on your other phone.
Just a minute, then.
I think the problem is the computer that.
Right now, what's that like?
No,
it's still got feedback.
Yeah. So I think it might be best if Aviva just.
I think so.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Jan.
Sorry, Jan.
Is Jan's?
I am here. Yes.
I know you're there, Jan. Is Jan's Zoom muted?
Yes, it's muted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we're gonna have to do that. Aviva, do you mind?
Oh, no. I tell you what. I've got one other. I've got one other suggestion. What about if Jan speaks into the Zoom? I see the picture, but I mute my Zoom.
Yeah, I think that might work.
I'll do that now.
Jan, if you read now, that should work. No, because we can't hear her.
Because she's muted.
Because Irene is muted. Yeah, I think the problem is not to mute the Zoom, but to turn her volume down on the computer. So she wouldn't be muted, but her volume would be down. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that's what we need to do.
We needed to work this out beforehand.
But I think right now we don't have that much time. Plan B it, so.
Can I read now?
Yeah, just go ahead now, Jan.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I think it's Jan's Zoom in the background.
No. Okay. What I'm going to suggest, Irene, is
Jan, if you unmute yourself and Irene mute
no, we know
herself.
Jan's audio isn't working. We tried with it before.
I think we might, sorry, I think we might need to do our plan. Yeah.
Irene, can you mute yourself because we're just getting feedback?
I've just muted Irene.
What I'm going to suggest is if Irene and Jan liaise and see if there's any other way they can do it, I can come back at the end and see if we can get one more poem from Jan. But I think what I should do is move on now to Suhrab while they try and work that one out. What a shame. I tell you what, you've had a taste, you've had an echo as well. Maybe if you want more of Jan's poems, you're just going to have to buy the book and read them. Let me move on. So Suhrab, who is one of my other mentees, he's an Afghan poet who speaks in the Dari dialect, of Farsi, the Dari dialect of Farsi. He writes in Farsi, and his poem was translated by Hamid Kabir, and I had then helped shape it into an English poem, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. But first of all, about Suhrab. Suhrab's been well known in Afghanistan as an award-winning poet from a young age. And he's also a multimedia journalist, multi-talented then. He writes not just poems and articles, but also lyrics, most notably for the very first female Afghan rapper. But that combination of things, being a poet, a liberal journalist, a feminist, and indeed a human rights activist, proved very dangerous for him. So in 2013, when he received death threats, he felt like he had to flee Afghanistan. And his journey took him across several countries until he arrived in the UK in 2014, where he sought refugee status. His poem is a pamphlet length, long poem. It's called The Eighth Crossing, and it charts that journey, that escape from Afghanistan, from the hot deserts of Balkh to the Calais jungle, via refrigerated lorries crossing the Channel to England itself. It's a poem that's written in the first person, this narrative poem, but that first person is Suhrab, but it's more than Suhrab. He's incorporated also the stories of his friends, of his family, of other Afghan refugees that he met in Calais. So this is a poem that is telling quite an important story and bearing witness in everything that it's doing. And it also calls back to poets from the past, including particularly one who was silenced by having his lips sewn together. So poetry is a powerful thing, but a dangerous thing. But the thing that I want to say before I pass over to Suhrab to read for us from the opening to his long poem is that it isn't just an act of bearing witness, or maybe that just is wrong, but it is a very, very, very strong poem as a poem. Suhrab's used to writing the ghazal, and in fact a translation of one of his ghazals just appeared in the most recent issue of Modern Poetry in Translation. And that lyricism, that use of rhythm to drive forward a momentum, that use of a refrain coming back again and again, they're all there in his free verse, alongside very visceral images. So as you're going to hear, this is a poem with momentum, flow, and a huge amount of power. So Suhrab, over to you.
Thank you, Aviva, for the kind introduction, and I would like to thank everyone involved in this great project. I'm going to read the very first part of the poem in both Persian and English, and I dedicate this to those who have lost their lives trying to get to a better life. مرزن خواست ریگ های استخوان سوز نیمروز کفش کهنه‌ام را که از پای سرباز مرده در آورده بودم ذوب می کند این بیابان بی خدا، این بیابان بی خدا، این بیابانی که تنها یک اژدهای آتش به دهان از جهنم ترسیم شده در قرآن کم دارد. چه کسی پایش را بر گلوی کابل مانده بود که کابل ما را مثل خون لخته تف کرد. The first crossing. The bone-burning sands of Nimrose melt my tattered boot, borrowed from the feet of a dead soldier. This brutal desert, this godless desert, this fire-breathing dragon, flames blazing from its mouth like the hell painted in the Quran. Who has his foot on Kabul's throat? Kabul, the city that threw me up like a blood clot. کودک که بودم به تماشای مرده ها می رفتیم، دست ها و پاها، چشم های باز خیره به هیچ، دست ها و پاها مثل کیسه های ریک روی یک دیگر، بار تمام اجساد را که دیدم بر شانه دارم. خاک طعم خون، آب بوی نفت دارد، صدای قدم زدن مرگ مثل خراشیده شدن شیشه با میخ ضربان در ضربان دنبالم می کند. Now I carry the burden of all those corpses on my shoulders. The soil tastes of blood, the water smells of crude oil. I walk the rhythmic beat of my journey, the sound of death follows with the screech of a nail scratching glass, and we become a flock of sheep, fugitives from the slaughterhouse, stacked on top of each other. هراس از شلیک مرزبان در حلق من خشک شده است. ما گوسفندان فراری از قربانگاه روی هم افتاده ایم تا با تند باد بگذریم از سیستان و بلوچستان. The fear of being shot by a border guard dries in my throat as we pass like a gust of wind through Sistan and Baluchistan. Like a gust of wind through Sistan and Baluchistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we've just heard back from Jan. Rather than trying to read that again with Irene, what she's done is she's said, could I read one of her poems for her? So I'm just going to do one of Jan's poems, which, as you'll hear, so different from Suhrab's, the kind of big, powerful moving on, and a kind of Jan is a more gentle, reflective poet. So this is her poem about her father, who the collection is dedicated to. Father, he gets up early in the cold, even on Sundays, makes sure our home is warm when we wake, prepares our breakfast and lunch for school. My sister and I are keen to revise with Dad after dinner. His approach is easy to follow. Ardently, we learn by heart the countries of his world, the capitals as they appear on the highlighted globe. We wake daily to his warmth. At the weekdays we rush, even when he's already polished our shoes ready for school. But on the weekends we take our time till the meaty aroma drifts and we're bound to the kitchen and Father's charismatic aura. We ask him to tell us a story, and Father is always willing to share tales from the past that are lessons for us to learn. Did we thank him? No, we only nagged him, took him for granted, as if all fathers are the same. So that was Jan's poem about her father. And it's quite interesting because her collection is very much dedicated to the memory of her father. Agata Palmer, who I'm introducing next, has a collection that is about the memory of her mother. So that kind of sense of how powerful our parents are pervade both poets. And actually from Suhrab's too, there are all these memories reflecting back as he journeys back to his childhood. But Agata, whose poems I'm going to come to, they're about her mother, but about more than her mother. Agata's a bilingual poet. She's from Poland and she performs, and I'm saying this because she's just got the confidence to start doing it recently, and I think she should do it a lot more. But she performs on both the Polish and the English slam scenes, and it's been really amazing to watch her confidence grow. She came to the mentoring scheme as quite a newbie, just kind of beginning to learn how to work with poetry. She'd written for a while, but not studied poetry. And within a very short time, she's become a really deft poet and begun to secure publication in magazines and journals. Her big influence poetically is Wisława Szymborska. And like Szymborska, she writes about the family, about daily life, about small things, but they're always done in a very fresh way. Agata pays attention to detail. She observes things closely. She observes minutiae or the minute, but then she expands to make each of those poems also about wider political or emotional points. Sometimes she does that in a serious way. Often she does it with a lot of humour. And you're going to see this. There's a little series she's going to read which are based on moths, but each of them, although each of them is a moth poem, they make very different poetic gestures because she's very attentive to sound and language, and sound and language is her mode of working, but also often her subject too, as she writes quite often about both of her languages. So Agata, over to you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Aviva. Thank you for all the hard work and wonderful mentoring I've benefited from, and perhaps the best way of honoring everyone who has made this project possible and everyone who's contributed to me stepping into the shoes of a poet is offering these few poems to you. And you've been introduced to my canvas that are tiny moths that I find adorable. So each poem has a title that is a true name, biological English British name for a moth. Prominent moth. You are like a movie star from the era of silent films, glamour and shades of grayscale, wearing patterned lace with a ferret trim and staccato heels. I almost expect you to light up a cigarette in a long holder and blow smoke playfully into my eyes. Then, sipping a highball held in a gloved tentacle, you tell me all the secrets of others, overheard in the privacy of candlelight. You indiscreet Greta Garbo of the insect world. The next one is called Black Archer's Moth. All your glimpse will be the cassock of my wings, priestess of darkness, keeper of shadows. It's how I serve my purpose. I am the bringer of loss. I didn't ask for it, but there goes another. You aren't the only one pleading, why me? Haven't you noticed how urgently I long to follow the light till death, just like you? The next moth is silkworm moth. Have you seen a real silkworm moth up close? A teddy bear with combs for eyelashes. She swans in white feathers like a flapper, ready to break into a Charleston step. How unsuitable for a farming slave. To obtain a single kilo of silk, it takes almost 7,000 worms being killed, boiled, or gassed, depending on the method. And the heavy breathing you hear behind me, it's my dog dreaming about moths, probably. She's also known to snore, so apologies for that. The next moth is called a bogong moth. Like that Australian moth, I nested in my safe cocoon. A poem, The Necessary Womb Sack, where on my own terms, I incubated myself into a resilient traveler. And just to sign off with a tiny little poem that I would love to be my kind of signature poem, called Silence. In our times dominated by words, texts, emails, slogans, blogs, opinions, causes, allegations, investigations, I wish to sprinkle silence upon you, to wrap us up in its deep, soft folds. Can you taste its vast landscapes? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Agata, and thank you, Suhrab, and thank you, Janan. Sorry we had some technical difficulties there, but thank you all. So our next mentor is Graham Fawcett. Graham has worked as a freelance broadcaster in literature and music on Radio 3 for 25 years and on Radio 4 and the World and Italian services. He has also worked as a tutor with the Poetry School for 17 years, and he taught translation at Goldsmith College for 15 years and has guest lectured at various English universities. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you very much indeed, Danielle. Well, there are, I reckon, 3 ways in which I could tell you about Hasan Kahya. So let's start with the first, which is to talk about him in a sort of book jacket sort of way. And I'm talking about this book. That's the front of it. And I've got a copy of this, and it's been signed by Hasan, and he gave it to me this morning. So a real advanced copy. So to talk about him in that way is to talk about the story of any exile, actually, particularly if they're also a poet, as we all are this evening. And so you sense how the one has inevitably helped to create the other, and the life and the story come together as they do in this latest collection of Hasan's, one of what I consider to be the really beautifully produced set of chapbooks that exiled writers are launching and celebrating tonight. Hasan, as his book jacket biography will tell you, is from Turkish Cyprus. He was born in Limassol, and his apparently comfortable achievement in composing in English comes perhaps in part from having been here in England for nearly 50 years. Though I would add that nobody's achievement in composing poetry in any language should be underestimated, especially when it's their second or their third. The second way maybe then is to tell you about what it's been like to have been able and to have been privileged to work with Hasan, as Aviva said earlier in that memorable phrase of hers, being himself both on and off the page. His chapbook, The Pale Map, is, I think, an example of some of his very best work to date, and I've seen his work on and off over 5 years. It's engaging, it's natural, it's sensitively crafted. And I like to say that his approach to poetry is that of a soldier in a way which has absolutely nothing to do with militarism at all. He's absolutely committed, he's assiduous, he's open to guidance, he's alert to the option of disagreement, and he insists on plying his own furrow. He's forever soldiering on, having lost his only access to a computer at the beginning of the lockdown at the closed City Lit. We came to an arrangement whereby he sent me his latest poem in an email on his phone with line endings marked by a single oblique stroke, verse breaks by a double one, and I then lineated them to those instructions. He absolutely would not give up. He saw that there was going to be a way. So he combines, I suppose, in fact, I don't suppose, I know, he combines the ability to listen and to reflect with a tangible knowing of what he wants, which is born of having listened and reflected to the experiences of his life. I reckon he's a Renaissance man, and he doesn't flash it about, but it suits him to some extent. It's his open secret, and learning and culture are in his bloodstream. He seems to have an unquenchable curiosity for all things philosophical, which translates into being open-eyed to the philosophy of writing poems. Parable, aphorism, these two meet together in his poetry as if they're old friends. Only this morning when he dropped by to collect the chapbooks which he'd sent to my address, he quoted Nietzsche to me because the idea of what Nietzsche had said just grew out of the conversation we were having while he was busy packing the chapbook parcel into his wheeled suitcase. And out came Human, All Too Human, which I must confess I'd never heard before, and I'm grateful to him for having educated me. Wheeled suitcase, but then Hasan is a poet who's on wheels himself in his thought, I think. He's also willing to get to grips with the disparity of approach he sees between poets writing poems in Turkish and in English. The first, which he described to me once as more loosely composed, and the second, as he called it, more fastidious, which I asked him what he meant about that, and he in the end, he said that what he really meant was disciplined. So Hasan the poet and Hasan the backstory illustrate very well why Exiled Writers needs to exist and how well you at Exiled Writers managed to find these right people, all of whom we are enjoying being in the company of on the screen tonight. And there's a third way, which is to let Hasan let his poems talk to us. So here he is now, and we can see him too, which is lovely, to read to us from his chapbook, The Pale Map.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Shall I start? Okay. My first poem is Rain. I love the patter of rain on windows, my mother used to say. Though some other sounds, frogs, dogs, and cicadas would keep her wide awake. I do understand now that I'm her age. The stint at the French Nursery must have done it, along with grandpa's money, love of foreign languages, double glazing for all weathers. Yet the tremors of hate in Cyprus would shake the foundations. But then, what's foreign about the rain, except that it's a go-between from dark clouds to dark faces? I mean, it's not water, as you know it, airy, out of thin air. That's the first one. My second poem is the title poem. It's The Pale Map. It's a 7-link for Fikret Demirağ, my deceased friend and poet, who also happened to be my Cypriot mentor. Give me an olive grove on a sunny slope. Add some lemons, bitter lemons for taste. And the sea, the inner sea, to seize the eye. The fire in my heart comes from the olives. My tears from the lemons my ancestors ate. Yet the sea absorbs it all, makes me forgive. But forget, shall I ever forget? That's the end of the second poem. I have a very short poem, which was written long time ago. This is an old poem of mine. It was composed in Nicosia, 1989. It's short but sweet, I think. Like the removal of an oppressive veil, a hot, sleepless night is bravely wrestled with, and the jonquil bud bursts into bloom, fresh and golden smiled, the face of my childhood sweetheart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hasan. Thank you. So our final mentor of the evening is Atef Alshaer. He is a lecturer in Arabic and Cultural Studies at the University of Westminster. He was educated at Birzeit University in Palestine and the School of Oriental and African Studies, where he obtained his PhD and taught for a number of years. He is the author of several publications in the field of language, literature, and politics. He regularly contributes to academic and media outlets, including the BBC, Independent, iNewspaper, Al Jazeera, and Radio Monocle. He is also a published poet and translator. Welcome, Atef. I think you are muted. If you could unmute, please. Sorry.
I was. Is it okay now? You can hear? Okay, great. Sorry about this. Thanks, Danielle, for the introduction, and thanks, David, and everybody for this amazing effort. I'm very pleased to introduce the poet Nada Menzalji. She is not with us tonight. She's in Syria, and I'm sure we all wish her the best. The situation is difficult in Syria, and for some very difficult circumstances, she's not able to be with us. But I'm very happy for she and I worked on together, and I look forward to receiving a copy. I have yet to get one, but I look forward very much to receiving a copy soon and to have it in my hand. But for now, I will rely on the record I have. For that, let me introduce Nada, who's an absolutely wonderful human being, and then I will read two poems by Nada. She's a Syrian poet, author, journalist, editor, and translator. She studied civil engineering at the University of Laodikia, her hometown. She left Syria for London in 1998, where she worked for a number of Arab newspapers, as well as an Arab editor for Ink Publishing. She's now a freelance journalist at the BBC. Nada taught Arabic at SOAS for 4 years. She was the guest poet at the United Nations celebration of the International Day of the Arabic Language in Geneva in 2019, and has participated in many poetry festivals and readings in Europe and the Middle East. Her published poetry collections in Arabic include Withered Petals for Dinner and the Thefts of a Nameless Poet. She also has written and published many articles and poems in prominent Arabic publications. In addition, her work has appeared in 2 poetry anthologies in French and an anthology of Syrian poetry from the 1990s. This is just really the official kind of biography of Nada, but she's actually much more than all of this. So this is just a simple version of introducing Nada, but she's a great person and a great poet, and I'm very happy to introduce her. So the first poem that I will read upon the advice of David. I'll read in Arabic, and I know many of you don't know the language, but I hope you will. The language, listening to it will be satisfactory. The tone of the language is I guess, is beautiful, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Obviously, I'm a native speaker, so anyway, so I'll read the Arabic and then I will read the English version. So the first one is Ghiyab, which is absence, the title of the poem. So I read the poem in Arabic now. في غيابي ستحط الحمامات السمان وربما تواعدت نملة مع صاحبتها في إفريز شباكي. ربما مر الحلزون كاتب الرسائل وترك لي إحدى رسائله الغامضة. ربما اشتهت نحلة أن تغير نكهة الرحيق. ربما اضطرت فراشات لنزوح جماعي، أو كان سرب العصافير. ربما عمرت عناكب إماراتها وربما هدمها الدخيل. ربما القرنفل أزهر قبل الأضاليا، ربما الغردينة أصيبت هذا الصيف بالعقم، ربما غزا العشب أرض الذكريات، ربما سيحدث كل هذا في غيابي ولا يبقى صوى وآثارهم وآثاري حين نتساوى في الغياب. So that's the poem in Arabic. I will now go and read the poem in English. Just bear with me. Absence. In my absence, fat doves will come down. Maybe an ant will have a date with its friend ant in my windowsill. Maybe the snail, that letter scriber, has passed by and left me one of its ambiguous letters. Maybe a bee desired to change the scent of flowers. Maybe butterflies were forced to flee collectively. Or maybe a flock of sparrows. Maybe spider webs built their emirate and an infiltrator came and destroyed it. Maybe cloves blossomed before the dahlia. Maybe the gardenia was made infertile this summer. Maybe the grass invaded the land of memories. Maybe all of this will take place in my absence, leaving only doubt behind, their traces and my traces, when we become equal in absence. Now I'll read the second poem in Arabic, and this one is about hope. It doesn't have a title, but the title in English is Beyond Hope. So I'll read the one in Arabic and then I read it in English. That's the second one. قبل فترة عثرت على أمل. كان في خزانة تتكدس فيها الأفكار منذ سنوات، ولا يتسنى لي أن أنسقها. بعضها أصبح ضيقا وبعضها فضفاضا أكثر مما يليق، فالتغير مستمر في حجم تطلعاتي. كان الأمل المنشود مراوغا وشبه مستحيل. قصصت أكمامه، وسعت إبطيه، غيرت موضع الأزرار، أطلته من موضع وقصرته من آخر. حين انتهيت من تعديله أضحت استحالته تامة. So that's in Arabic. I read in English. Beyond hope, beyond hope. Some time ago, I found hope sitting in a wardrobe, stacked with ideas for years, forgotten. Some of them became tight, and others more loose than appropriate. Change is constant, as befits the size of my aspirations. Hope was elusive, akin to impossible. I trimmed its sleeves. I enlarged its armhole. I changed the location of buttons. I lengthened it on one side and shortened it on another. When I finished amending it, its impossibility grew complete. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Atef. Thank you. And thank you for standing in for Nada. We wish her well. And so I think that concludes our evening, but I believe our founder, Dr. Jennifer Langer, would like to say a few words before we conclude our evening. Jennifer, are you there?
Thank you very much, Danielle. Thank you very much for hosting so well.
and so patiently. Yes, well, the poems certainly did speak to us and took us on a really wonderful journey, which was so diverse and drew on the sort of the roots of the poets. So we kind of English-born poets, we can learn so much from you, the exiled writers, really. It should be a two-way process. And I only hope that all the movers and shakers of the literary world were listening in tonight to such talent that's undiscovered in the mainstream world. And we hope, you know, you will all find your place in that world and go on ever forward and onwards and upwards, which was my old school motto. So I'd like to thank all the editors, translators, poets, Jane Duran, Aviva Dautch, Atef Alshaer, Catherine Davidson, Hamid Kabir, and Graham Fawcett. I think that's everyone who worked with the poets. And I'd like to take this occasion to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. David Clark, who was the project manager from start to finish. And he has been totally committed to the project, to dealing with problems through thick and through thin, liaising with each poet, with each of their mentors, to explain each part of the process. And he's put himself into the whole process absolutely, totally and utterly, totally committed, as I said. And all the phases of the project have been on paper look quite simple, but in practice, there were always sort of issues to deal with. So we started off with the process of selecting the participants who each submitted samples of their work. In many cases, the work was in their mother tongue. So then we had to research competent translators who could, or not only translators, literary translators or poetry translators who could write a short assessment report on the work. And finally, David and I could make a collaborative decision about who should be selected. Then there was the process of inviting mentors to work with the poets, with the exiled poets. And in one or two cases, that could be a bit fraught, but we finally sorted it out and everyone got working together. And then in the case of translation, we then had to deal with selecting editors, appropriate editors. And then what was the next stage was David liaising with the printers, with the design and layout team, with the poets, of course. And then finally, these little chapbooks were produced, and all the poets should have received their boxes. And thank you, Lester, for that lovely photo of you opening your box. And yes, the mentors will certainly be sent a copy of the chapbook of the poet they mentored. And then our final, the final event of the project, as Danielle mentioned at the beginning, is an Access to the UK Literary World event on the 13th of February, which is targeted at refugee and migrant writers. And we have the editor of Modern Poetry and Translation, of Poetry Review, we have the director of Carcanet, of the literary consultancy, and one or two others. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. Congratulations to our poets. I'll put the link in the chat one more time of how to purchase the books. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Just to say how wonderful it has been to work on this project. It's been hard work, but it's been so worthwhile and exciting. I'm really glad how it has turned out. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
I want to leave. It's been such a great evening. Really wonderful.
And we hope to see you all next week at the prose launch, which is next Thursday, same time, same place on Zoom.
Yes.
See you then.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
A quick thank you before people disappear, because Jill Tipping, who was our designer, did an absolutely incredible job on the pamphlets, and she worked so hard, putting in a massive amount of time and detail, working with the poets and the mentors. And it's such a shame we're not in a real venue, so you can't see them all, but please do have a look, and the design work is all hers, so thank you, Jill.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for saying that.
Oh, for a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Danielle. Danielle, thank you. David, thank you, everyone, on all the points.
Congratulations.
You too.
Well done.
Thank you.
Beautiful poems, really beautiful poems tonight. Wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, true. Christine, hello and bye. Hasan, good points. Thank you as well for sharing. All right, I'm leaving. See you soon, probably.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, David. Yes, everyone. You're on mute, Mehrangiz. We can't hear you. Mehrangiz, you're on mute. Still on mute.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say thank you, Jill, Aviva, Catherine, David, Jennifer, and all who have been involved with such a great project. Thank you all. I really enjoyed the poems, and thank you, your poems and everyone's. They were very nice. It was a great night. Thank you so much. Now, am I still in the mute?
No, it's great. We heard you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting now, but have a good night. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.